What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Colin, you're watching Bug Out Overland, and on this episode I'm going to show you how to install a Yankum Groove Fairlead and tie a locking Brummell Splice on your trail rig. Let's get started. To remove my current setup, I'm going to be using the following tools: a 3/4 inch open-end wrench, a 3/4 inch socket, a 3/8 ratchet, a straight blade razor, and just a little flathead screwdriver. To install my Yankum Groove Fairlead and tie my locking Brummell Splice, I'm going to be using the following tools: a 3/4 inch wrench, a 3/8 ratchet, a 3/8 Allen socket, a Sharpie, a good pair of scissors, some measuring tape, a fid, and some electrical tape. Alright, first things first, you're going to want to remove your current setup if you haven't already. As for me, I'm running a Smitty-built X20 Gen 3 10K winch with a synthetic line and a factory hook. This means in order to get to the bare winch line, I'm going to have to remove the hook, cut off the locked thimble, remove the protective sleeve, and lastly remove the old Fairlead. Now remember, you may not be running the same setup as me, so your steps to get down to the bare winch line may vary depending on what you're running. For me, the first thing I'm going to want to do is unspool a little bit of the winch line in order to expose all of that protective sleeve. Next, I'm going to want to remove my hook. This next part is not going to be fun. I now have to cut off this locked thimble. You may not have to cut your winch line in order to remove the thimble. You may just have to untie it or undo it. Mine, however, isn't like that. So I'm going to pull back enough of this sleeve to expose the winch line fibers that aren't really damaged. But what you'll notice is it is significantly thicker than a 3/8 inch winch line because the two sides here combine into one. So unfortunately, what I'm going to have to do is go to the desired diameter. As you can see, there's a significant difference between the sizes in the two. So I'm going to have to cut off this larger portion, which is going to be about between 12 and 18 inches in order to get to this desired diameter to work with. And to do that, I'm just going to use a straight blade razor. So let's go ahead and get to our desired length, which is going to be right about here, and we're just going to cut it right down the middle. There we go. Now that that's out of the way, we're just going to want to clean this up a little bit, get it nice and pretty, and this is what we're going to use to work with to create our Brummell Splice. Now that we've got the hook and the lock thimble off, we're going to just slide this protective sleeve off, and now all we've got left to mess with is just removing that old Fairlead. Now the hardware for your Fairlead might be different than the hardware for my Fairlead, but I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch open-end wrench to hold the nut on the back side, and a 3/4 inch socket and ratchet to take off the bolts on the front side. Now you just slide off the Fairlead, and your Yankum Groove Fairlead is ready to be installed. Now, to install your Yankum Groove Fairlead, all you're going to do is take the loose winch line here, thread it through, pull it all the way up to the edge of it. Then you're going to take the provided hardware, being a locking nut and one of the bolts, And you're just going to hand thread it through there just to keep it on. Let's get that nut back there. Up there. Now, you're going to take the same 3/4 inch open end wrench to hold the locking nut, and you're going to take a 3/8 Allen key and a ratchet and just tighten it nice and snug. You don't want to over tighten these. Alright, and just like that, your Yankum Groove Fairlead is installed. Now, for the fun part, where we get to tying the Brummell Splice. So that way it loops around right there, nice and protected. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Step 1 to tying your Brummell Splice is going to be making your first mark. Your first mark is going to need to be about 34 times the length of your diameter. We're using a 3/8 inch diameter winch line, multiply that by 34, and you get 12.75 inches. So let's get our tape measure out and mark that on the line. And get a Sharpie or something similar that's going to stick to it. Get a 12.75 inches or 12 3/4 inches. Mark that on my winch line. Go ahead and put the tape measure away. And just for safe measure, I'm going to go ahead and mark along the entire circumference of that winch line just to make it a little bit easier for me to see. And going all the way around. Oops, making marks on my workbench, no big deal. And there you have it. That's our first mark. Alright, well, we've got one mark made, so now we're going to go ahead and make our second mark. You're going to want to make your second mark around the approximate desired diameter of your Brummell Splice loop. For me, and for the most average people, that's going to be 7 inches in diameter. So we're going to line up with that first mark and measure about 7 inches. Grab our tape measure here, put that out, and make that mark it right around 7 inches. Once we've got it where we want it, I'm going to go ahead and take my Sharpie again and mark it right here in the same spot. And let's go ahead and grab that Sharpie. And again, I'm going to wrap it around the entire circumference of the winch line. This isn't necessarily something that you have to do. Again, this is just for me. Make it a little easier on me to find as I'm working on the working on our Brummell Splice. And there's our second mark. And there you have it. That's going to be what your Brummell Splice loop is going to look like at the end. I've got more markings on my workbench, no big deal, it'll wash off later. And just lay that there. Alright, for this next step, we're going to open our first portal, as I call it, at the second mark. So first thing you're going to want to do is locate your second mark, which is going to be right here. And then you're going to grab both sides of Mark 2 and gently push them together. And this is going to basically loosen the strands up in the line. Next, take your fid, or whatever you have, something similar, and slowly dive it through the middle, like that. It should look something like that. Even strands on either side of the fid. And just gently push it through. And there you go. It should look something like that. Alright, and for step 3, we're going to push the tail of the winch line through the first portal here at Mark 2. To do this, we're going to utilize our fid to help guide the tail through. Just get this straightened out here. Alright, so grab yourself some electrical tape. We're going to wrap the end of our tail around the end of our fid. and you're just going to get it started. Don't be afraid to be generous when applying this electrical tape on. Just be sure not to stack it all in the same place, because all that's going to do is increase the diameter and make it even more difficult to get it through the hole. So we're going to set this to the side here. Done with that, and we're just going to gently start pushing our way through the portal. Once you get the head of that tail through the portal, you're just going to gently start rocking it back and forth around until it pops right on through. Just keep working it, and voila, there it is. Now we're going to go ahead and take our fit off, take the tape off. It's definitely a very satisfying feeling when the winch line gets through the portal. And set that off to the side, and you should have something that looks a little bit like this. And now we're going to pull it through until the marks match up with each other, mark 1 and 2, just to get everything reset back into position. And it should look something like that. Just make sure your marks are lined up. All right, and now we're ready for step 4. Next, we're going to kind of repeat step 2 and 3. First, pull the line in on itself, but not all the way, creating this little nub on the end. Then you're going to locate mark 1, where we measured the first time, at 12.75 inches from the tail. And you're going to grab the mark 1 on either side of it, just like we did before, and you're going to gently push it in, squeezing it, loosening up those strands. Then you're going to go ahead and grab your fid and jam it through the middle right there, carefully, making sure that there's an even number of strands on either side. And now you've got your second portal made. Alright, step 5 is where it starts to get interesting. We're going to take this nub that we created in step 4, and we're going to push it through the second portal we made here at mark 1. Make sure that portal is open nice and big, because pushing this nub through is going to be a tight fit. Just make sure you're not damaging those strands when you're widening that hole. You can utilize the fid and tape with this step, but I found it easier to simply push it through using my hands. And once you get that head through, just start pulling it through the other side, massaging those fibers around it until at last it just pops through. Just like this. And by the end of it, you should have some weird looking shape like this. Now we're just going to open up the nub that we have, creating an eye. Now you should have, when you get this nub opened up, you should have 2 sets of eyes and a loop in between them down on the bottom, giving it kind of like, I don't know, a handcuff look or something. Definitely looks like handcuffs to me, but yeah, there we go. This next step is pretty easy. We're just going to collapse the locking eye in on itself, kind of like a sleeve. Just grab the right eye at the joint and start sliding it down the winch line. You'll feel it get tighter and tighter as you go. Then just massage the fibers all around until it's nice and even, and you should get something that looks like this. Now you can grab either side of the winch line and tighten it, pulling the 2 joints together. And as you can see, our loop is starting to take form a little bit. Step 8, we're going to reset the locking eye. For starts, you're going to want to take your fid and go through the eye between the tail and the winch line, like so. And we're essentially going to have to take the tail and force it back through the eye. This is going to be an even tighter fit than before. Once you've got that opening ready, you can start pushing it through. best as you can. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a tighter fit. Yep, and there goes my fid. It's a really tight fit, so I'm just going to utilize my fid to assist making the hole slightly larger to push that line through. And there we have it. The line is through. And should look something like this. And now we're ready to move on to the next step. Next, we're just going to pull the tail through and over itself and kind of massage it down a bit. Now, as you can see, our knot and loop are starting to take form, and you can see the security of this method in these two locking joints right here. Alright, so the last step to completing our locked Brummell splice, and probably the most important, is tapering the tail. To start off, we're going to cut off a few strands of somewhat varying lengths from the end of our tail. So you're going to grab your scissors and slowly and carefully poke and pull away at some of the strands. As you can see, the end of my tail is a little bit of a mess right now, so I'm just going to try as best as I can to grab a few. It helps using the scissors to poke and prod away at the strands, but because the end of my tail is such a mess, I'm just going to use my fingers. Once you've selected the strands, just cut them off close to the base where they meet the line. And there's our first one. Alright, I've got 5 off, so I'm just going to cut one more off for safe measure. If your line is anything like mine, you should have like 12 strands in it or something like that. So I'm cutting out 6 from the end, but I do at least 4. Alright. More or less 6 strands of different lengths cut from the end of my line. So after you've cut those strands, the tip of your tail should look similar to this. Not pretty, but it'll work. So the next step to tapering the tail is going to be taking the tail of your rope and essentially combining it along the rest of the winch line right here. To do this, you're going to start by counting 3 V's down from your joint here. The closer you can get your entry point started to your joints, the stronger your Brummell splice will be. So here's our 3rd joint, and we're going to start by creating what I call our rattlesnake tail. Just gently start squeezing here as we did before, loosening up all those strands. Just kind of bunch them all together and make your way down the line, loosening them all up. You'll have to continue doing this throughout the whole process pretty much. Next, insert your fid at the beginning here, sort of in the center, and start feeding it through, working that line around the fid as you go. Once you get the fid started, we're going to take the tip of our tail here and tape it to the end of our fid here. So grab your handy dandy electrical tape and first start by wrapping a good amount around your fid. Then just grab your tail and start wrapping this thing up and down. We're going to utilize the fid to guide the tail through our rattlesnake tail, and we don't want it to separate while we're doing this. Otherwise, we'll have to pull it out and start all over again, and that's not fun. When you're ready, start feeding it through, and it's best if you use one hand to stabilize the fid and the other to start massaging the rattlesnake tail around the fid. This process may take a while, so you have to be kind of patient with it, and it may take you a few tries to get it right. You almost have to kind of wiggle it around to find that sweet spot for the fid to go through. And just slowly start working your way down, finding that sweet spot as you go. It's going to start to get real nice and tight here. Once it gets real bunched up, like depending on the size of your fid, once it starts to get real bunched up like this, you should be good to go. You're going to want majority, if not all of this fid covered up. We just want to make sure that this line does not become disconnected inside of our rattlesnake tail or before it even gets into the rattlesnake tail. But it may take you a few tries to do this. Alright, once you've got the fid covered up like this, locate an exit point for it as so, down here on the bottom. Just kind of find the tip of it and break an opening away for it. Then start pulling the fid from the pointed end, pulling the tail through your rattlesnake tail. Just be careful not to separate the tail from your fid here. Like I said before, this may take you a few tries to do. And eventually you'll feel the line pull through, and the hard part's pretty much over with once you get that line through. Like that. It's a satisfying feeling when you finally got it pulled through. Then just start massaging the rattlesnake tail back the opposite direction, and you're good to disconnect your fid, removing the tape from your fid and the tail. Alright, now just start massaging the line down, stretching back out those strands. This tapering of the tail is what gives a strength to the Brummell Splice, as the rattlesnake portion essentially works as a Chinese finger trap around the tail portion we concealed when there's tension on the line during a recovery situation. On a side note, this is a very helpful thing to know how to do when you're out on the trails in case, God forbid, your winch line snaps and you have to retie it or repair it. And yeah, you should have something that looks like this. If you do, your Brummell Splice is complete and you're good to go. Now let's just get this snugged up against our Fairlead. Alright guys, and just like that, your Brummell Splice is complete, your Yankum Groove Fairlead is installed, and you are ready to partake in safer recoveries with a more protected winch line. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the video and found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys out on the trails.